Welcome to Educator Self-Regulate, a podcast for educational leaders, teachers, and students, where in less than 20 minutes, we unpack educational research to support you and your students to become better learners. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm here with the lovely Matt Pittman. Welcome, Matt. How are you today?
Yeah, doing really well. Excited to have a quick chat and link two of our passions together.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. Matt, how many years have you been working in education?
14 it is now.
Amazing. So he's bringing a wealth of experience with him. And Matt, you've just announced on LinkedIn that you're starting a new role in 2025. Can I share it here now on the podcast?
Yeah, you can. Absolutely.
By the time this is released, it'll be the start of 2025. So you're going to be the director of senior school at Catholic Regional College in Caroline Springs?
I am, yeah. It's a new role. School community is growing, so looking to build some capacities and help the school grow and build those connections between a lot of new members of the community out in Melbourne's West.
Mate, I like the fact that you snuck connections in there because, Matt, you're also the author of the Connection curriculum. I've got it here for those looking at our little reels on social media. You're the author of the Connection curriculum, but you're also one of Australia's most influential educators, as voted by the Educator, mate. And I think that's worthwhile celebrating. And so you're doing quite a bit of work in the connection space. I noted that often, we've spoken about this, our books on are often brought together because of the synergy, the alignment, what you're advocating for and what I advocate for, being self-regulated learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are looking at the two books and we share a publisher also. So that's like, they've got that alignment as well. But it's the Connection curriculum is about building the bonds between the people that are within these school communities. And your book, Educate to Self-Regulate, is about equipping people with tools that manage emotions, behaviors, and that sense of independence. So it's almost like one creates the environment and the other and the tools to use within that environment. And I think people are just seeing, that dual focus and it's something that's super important for schools to work with at the moment.
Matt, I have a question then, because connection can be defined in many different ways. Can you give our listeners like a one sentence synopsis of how you would explain connection in a simple way, or at least the way you conceptualize it?
Connection is about taking everyone in your community. So that's the students, the staff, and the parents as well, and making sure that they feel seen, heard, and valued, and that, they're the pillars of a community. That is, you actually taking those groups of people and bringing them together and aligning them with the actual values, mission, and the lived experience of being a group of people that learn together. I think it's super important because we think we're really connected at the moment, but we're not. And I think there's a lot of things that are masquerading as connection, especially because of all of the advancements in digital tech. But there's something deep inside us, from many, many decades, centuries ago, being aligned with people and having an understanding of who's around you was a survival tool, and we still have that, and we still need it to survive. So connection is how you create a safe place with safe people, because learning is vulnerable. So we need that safe place, and that's why I love connection. And I think we should be focused on it as one of the main priorities moving forward.
Hey, not one sentence, but I loved it anyway.
No, I got carried away.
No, well, can I make a comment to that? Because I think I often, and perhaps this is for the listeners who sort of have a deeper understanding of cognitive psychology, but I often frame my thinking through Bandura's model of reciprocal determinism. Bandura argues that there's three factors essentially at play here. There's the environmental factors, which includes community and the connection that we have to the community and the people within that environment. There's what we know and believe, and then there's behavioral factors. And this argument is simply that, they're all operating in this sort of reciprocally causing, determining kind of way that there's arrows going everywhere in this kind of model. I often think about that from the lens of self-regulated learning, right? If we want learners to be able to self-regulate their behaviors, then they have to have a certain level of knowledge and beliefs about themselves as a learner that would allow them to do that. And how do we influence those knowledge and beliefs and that behavior? We think about the environment and the community in which they exist, because often some people, like, the aspiration here is self-regulated learning, but realistically, there's a substantial amount of our regulation that is co-regulated, and at a younger year, like, even more so when we're younger. Some people will argue it's always co-regulation because we're always co-regulating with the environment. And to some degree that is true. But then at the same time, the aspiration here is that in moments where the environment has less of an influence, that our personal agency comes into play a little bit more. So I think what you're saying is really, really important. The other line that I'm sort of drawing between our work is, I can't remember the episode, but earlier this season, Roy and I discussed the C framework. So Callan et al.'s research that has drawn together different self-regulated learning approaches and sort of created this very simple framework that they call SEE, setting, exchanges, events. And I feel like what we're talking about here today directly connects with the setting, environment, and what Callan et al. Talk about in that first kind of that setting column is really relationships, not just student to teacher, not just teacher to teacher. It's all the relationships and all the connections that exist, multiple ways, shapes, and forms. Does that sound aligned?
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
sorry, I was caught listening to you. Yeah, that was brilliant. I love a good web of connections, and schools can mimic those processes from nature by embracing the fact that this is kind of the default setting, and we're working against it by not leveraging connection and not creating those places where we have an understanding of each other and each other's needs and perspectives and the people in the room that you're sharing that experience with, because that's important in understanding your own regulation as well, is how do I fit within the room that I'm in and the people I'm with? Because we know that schools, you don't often get to choose who you're sharing that class with. You might have some familiar faces, but every new year or new switch of electives creates different potential for connection and challenges for regulating as well.
We accept the premise that connection is fundamental for creating or contributing to this setting that empowers learners to self-regulate. What would be your recommendations for educators to help them foster connection within their schools or within their classrooms?
I think it's really important to allow space and give permission for voice. Key to both topics we're talking about today is creating a space in which a young person or a staff member, that they can share and feel a part of what's happening and not feel isolated by a topic or an area of conversation. And so I think making sure that you're handing some of the class and some of the responsibility to the students to test how they react to it, see what kind of leadership skills, who can lead, who's willing to take the lead, and allow them that space to be curious about a topic, who's in their group if you're doing group work, and to set their own goals. One of the best strategies for educators is to work with goal setting and supporting those SMART goals. It's something I did a lot when I was at school, but I haven't seen as much in schools at the moment. Instead of sharing a learning goal, why don't we co-create something that aligns with what your interest in the topic is, and then connect them to the learning. And then through learning, you will bridge and you'll find interest with a person on this side of the room. You'll connect with somebody over the other, and you kind of learn how you fit in that space. And it brings learning to life. When you are challenged, it becomes meaningful and you pursue it. And that's when self-regulated learning becomes important. When you're driving, you're steering, doing head checks, you have to really know in what situation and what strategies you have to ensure that you learn best.
Can I chime in there, because goal setting is directly linked to self-regulated learning? Those familiar with kind of Zimmerman's model or even Pinchuch's model of sort of planning, monitoring, and evaluating, that self-regulated learning is these phases of learning And that goal setting sits in that planning phase or that forethought phase and is essential for us to monitor and evaluate our learning. I'm really curious about that. I love this idea of co-creating, co-crafting goals with our learners. The teachers in the audience are probably asking, what would that look like, Matt? Could you give us a more tangible vision of what that might look like? Is that something you've done in your own classes or seen in environments where our teachers sitting down with students and having these one-on-one conversations? Are they doing this at a class level?
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, I definitely have. I've had it, and it's one of those things that takes a couple of times to build the routine and shift for the students from almost participant, a more passive participant to an active participant in the lesson, which I think is exactly what we should be doing. The easiest way to incorporate it early on without throwing the whole classroom into chaos is to have your lesson and have your instruction and have your foundational part of the lesson where you're teaching, then have your application task and check for understanding and do all that. But have a section at the end of the lesson in which you ask the young people where to next, what part of what we've talked about interests you the most. And I think you be purposeful with your language because you're probably not going to catch everyone. What was the most interesting to you? You have 10 minutes to go and find information on it. Tell me what you've learned, or put them in groups if it's an even shorter period of time. Set it as a task to come back to, but it's just completely handover. Like you're not coming up with a question. You're saying what topic. They give you a topic and you say, go for it. A couple of times, once they expect, they might need to go hunting for answers or pay enough attention to have a component to work with. That works in your favor in terms of having them take charge a little bit. And it's not going to, I think the biggest thing is there's always the fear of derailing the lesson and we're going to fall behind if we change things. But this is only a small fraction at the end. And it's almost like the ultimate form of assessment from little things like who was listening to, who's really passionate about this topic. I've discovered 1, 2, 3 students are interested in this topic. I know who's really struggling because even when they're free to come up with ideas, they can't. And so it gives you a huge range of data. You have to train yourself to step back a little bit. Instead of teaching in that moment, you're guiding them towards and helping support them towards answering their own question. Because how often do we actually get them to answer their own questions? And that's the value in it. So yeah, that's how I would do it. It could work the first time. I don't want to make any big, bold promises, but it's that little section at the end of the lesson. As they get more confident and comfortable, and again, we're talking about that environment, hand more over and see what they come back with. And they'll get more comfortable with the people around them. They'll sit in that stress for a bit, but they'll work out of it. It's a shift in roles, but it's a safe activity in a safe place.
Mate, I love that. My brain is just firing with thoughts because it sounds so simple, but it could be so effective. It's recognizing that students can generate their own questions. It's empowering students to ask their own questions. It's creating time for students to explore their own musings. I sense that this has been like a bit of a gradual release of responsibility type situation where, learners would have to be like that culture of being able to use that time effectively or knowing how to generate their own questions is something that we would have to scaffold them up to so that they can effectively start to exercise that agency in that sort of realm. I'm going to quickly share 2 examples. One is in relation to what you're talking about, because I feel like it would lend itself to what you're talking about here in terms of personal voice and agency. And Benithan Primary School, a couple of the educators there introduced with their year 6s sort of the notion of SMART goals. They were doing quite a lot of work around the SMART goals, and they set up a pin board in the room that had all the kids' photos, and underneath each kid photos, the kids could go and pin up a little post-it note. And the kids set their own goals and they had it up underneath their photo on a pin board. Every day after lunch, they had, I think, 20 or 30 minutes, which they called SMART time, which meant that you had 20 to 30 minutes to progress your SMART goal. And they could replace their SMART goal at any point. But the idea was that they were using that 20 to 30 minutes to progress. And I believe it worked well for those students. So that's a kind of year 6 example. I also have recently been having conversations with Jen Gibb from Faith Lutheran College, Plainlands. But I know they're really progressing quite a lot around sort of student voice and agency. And they have a student council pitching subjects that they believe would be of value and interest to them as a young person cohort. They pitch it to teachers, and then through a process, a sort of co-constructed process, a number of those units get off the ground in Year 9 and Year 10 as part of their elective program. They're doing some really, really cool stuff. There's levels in which we can develop this connection, recognition, value, and meaning for the different parties play here in so many different shapes, ways, and forms.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Hopefully the educators in our audiences have picked up on a few ideas. Now, is your book the best place for some of these recommendations for practices?
The book is a toolkit for leaders and teachers to start the connection process. And I talk about connection as a journey, and it's broken into focus areas: student voice, agency, permission. If you're looking for inspiration, if you're looking for provocation and the tools to actually give these things a go, then yeah, that was my hope with writing the book. It is about, providing not the specific information that you need for your context, but the tools that shape it to what your school community needs. Because you can't connect to generic. It has to be deeply rooted in your school community. The tools are there and suggestions on how you can use it.
Amazing. Okay. And I know you have a website as well. Are there resources on the website as well? Or is it sounds like the book is going to be one resource for us?
So that's the plan. Our summer job, so 2025, hoping to have supporting resources and build the website to be a one-stop shop for those seeking to make connection a priority.
Amazing. Now, mate, it is time for our regular segment, On the Reg, which you are familiar with. We would love to hear a strategy or strategies that you use personally, whether it's to build connection or self-regulate your learning. Would you be happy to share something with us?
I think the biggest challenge with leadership roles and being at school, having a 2-year-old and all of that busyness of life, I do a lot of writing, and I like that's almost like my meditation, I suppose, to sit and write. And so I use time blocking a lot to just, the phone goes away, everything goes on do not disturb. I'm very fortunate that my wife, we kind of trade blocks and pass our daughter around to fit things in. Once or twice a week, I have a time, a night where I just block out time. My distractions are a huge distraction for me. It stops me from achieving what I want, which snowballs and impacts the rest of what I want to do. So I set a goal. I might be finished drafting an article and I go, well, I'm going to write the first third of it or the first section in this block. And that's my time blocked out. And I'll set blocks across the week, put it in my calendar, and it allows me to tick off the jobs I need to do and lower the stress and anxiety of trying to fit something that's really important to me around family and work without feeling guilty for taking that time to do it. So that's my strategy.
Mate, I don't actually feel like I need to add to that because I do time blocking as well. It sounds like we have a similar strategy. A lot of very productive, organized people share that time blocking is one of their go-to strategies. Hopefully our listeners have, got a little bit of insight into the connection curriculum, as you term it, and walking away with a few pragmatic strategies. Matt, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on here for our short podcast. Hopefully we can have you back for another session.
Love to come back. We never have a shortage of topics to talk about, so we could fill many 20-minute blocks.
So true. So true. Mate, all the best, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, mate.
If you are a new listener to the podcast, make sure you share it with friends, save it, or subscribe. And if you have any questions, and we really want to hear from our listeners, if you have any questions or comments, send us a DM through either of our social media channels, which is Twitter and Instagram at ed to self-reg. As always, to you and everyone else out there, keep regulating.